All right. Hello, what's new, adaptive physical education world? Haven't been on for a little while, and that's all right. I've been really busy with the holidays. I got married to a beautiful young lady over the time. It was amazing. Went back home to my area in Detroit. Got married at the Detroit Yacht Club on the river next to Canada, so it was just an amazing time. Had all my friends and family out to see us, so haven't been able to keep up with the podcast, but really excited. This last episode of the assessment panel is really fun and cool. We took audience questions. We had a few former guests who were audience questions. We had Beth Foster, who was on way back when, about a year ago, when we did nonprofits, and we did Lauren Lieberman, Dr. Lauren Lieberman, who was on there from the Capabilities episode, and they had some really profound questions. We asked assessment questions that range on how do we spread the word to how do we assess our entire program systematically, and then we have some more finite questions about how do you do correct verbiage and wording. Now, also, I did a follow-up interview, and I'm going to have that on for the next episode with Dr. Dale Ulrich, who is the creator of the TGMDs, and he comes in, talks about why he made those, and I have about a 20-minute interview to follow up with this one. So I hope you all enjoy this next one, and if you remember, our panelists include Dr. Lisa Silliman-French, my chair for my doctoral committee, as well as an APE professor at Texas Women's University, and Dr. Barry LeVay, a professor in the Department of Kinesiology at California State University and the author and co-author Positive Behavior Management in Physical Activity Settings textbook. Catherine Russell, a special education administrator for the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Marcy Pope, a co-director for the Northern California Adaptive Physical Education Consortium and lecturer at California State University. So take care and enjoy the episode.
No, it's fine. It was more so focusing on just, we talk about the fact that we're losing physical education positions across the U.S. And so focusing on using assessments to be able to provide administrators with support of why our profession is so important and being able to track student progress, not only on their motor skills, but also their fitness, endurance, muscular strength, and everything like that. And I don't think in adaptive physical education, we do as good of a job as we should at looking at our overall entire program. We focus a lot on one individual student and say, I met this goal and they improved. But being able to take your caseload and kind of put that data together and say, myself or my district as an adaptive physical education unit, this is what we're doing. And I think being able to focus more on that is comparable to physical educators that are doing that right now. But I don't think we do that as adaptive physical educators.
Are you talking a little bit like
a program assessment,
so
showing, not just one single student
assessment? Okay,
right.
And when I've had the unique experience. I've taught APE and I've taught special education. And when I was a special education teacher, they would take our whole math department and they would compile even all the special ed ones, and they would give us a program assessment. So is that kind of what you're saying? That we're not doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Beth, okay, so one of the things I would share is, for example, one of the things I like to say to my students at the universities is, if your administrator came to you tomorrow and said, we're going to have a meeting and to discuss cutting your program, and you've got a couple of weeks, what would you do? Well, the first thing I would do is I would look at data, and I would put some type of chart up and see, for example, are my students making progress? And I would talk health-related fitness, I would talk about fitness and how much your students need this. And so that piece, when we look at the purpose of assessment, probably one of the last things we think about, and we should think about, we think placement, we think programming, we think motivation, we think evaluating our program, but we should also be thinking about how can we advocate for our program, how can we justify why physical education needs to be in this, we need this more than anything, what's more important than your health? All right, we know that. I'm just speaking to the choir right now, but we need to educate other people, and sometimes the only thing they'll listen to is data. So that's how I'd respond to that.
I think that it is a good question, and looking at overall piece is how do we effectively assess our entire program, and our other departments I think are doing that. So, yeah.
All right, I'd like to think my question's a little more simple than that one, so a little more friendly to the Saturday morning situation we're in. I've heard some talk about TGMD3 from your panel, I think, and I've heard about that assessment coming out. Currently, my department's just now beginning to start to use TGMD2, which I've used in the past. I'm wondering, is it still an appropriate test to use knowing that TGMD3 is coming? Is it still current enough to present in IEPs and on reports?
Yes, it still is current, and you could still use it. The TGMD3 based on Dale it's ready to go. They're just this summer.
I would share is probably the TGMD is one of the better tests that defensible because of the validity, and it was norm reference on a stratified sample all over the United States of over 800 children. It's one of the few tests that really you could get up there and say, this is valid, this is reliable, this is administratively feasible, and so that's important, and that's often overlooked. And the TGMD3 he presented last year at our conference. There's only really some subtle changes that are going to be in the TGMD3 as far as the items.
Can I just so the TGMD3 is not out just yet, right, correct? No. But it's coming out, and we're using it right now because we're in our TWU program. But real quickly, could you talk about?
Well, just real quick on your comment on the TGMD2, I just want to say one quick thing. I always stress that if you're going to use the TGMD2 or whenever it comes out 3 for placement, I always have a little red flag that goes up. Always add, and I teach this to my students, always add additional information because it's only 12 items. And the general ed students are doing more than 12 items. They're doing a lot more. So I always, for example, ask my students, if you're going to use the TGMD2, that's fine because it has the valid, reliable information. Great, especially if you end up going to the courthouse. But I say add the C-tape items. There's 25 items on there. Pull in about 5 or 6 of those items. Get jump roping in there. Or add fitness. Quickly do the Brockport. Just throw some fitness stuff in there. So you have more than just the 12 items. And I think Dale has mentioned that he supports that to do that.
You know, when you look at the way the TGMD is set up, it's criterion reference and norm reference because you're assigning points to the criteria, and if you look at there are a number of if you look at the appendices, you can look at age group equivalencies. You could come up with this gross motor quotient. You can look at it from a locomotor and object control separately. There are a number of things that you can share with parents about the child, especially age equivalency.
My opinion, this is Lisa, make this loud and clear. It is not, my opinion, it is not a good placement assessment instrument. That's my opinion. I think you need more information because it doesn't provide enough information for placement. My opinion.
Well, tests are specific, and so if you wanted to, what I would say is that you're looking at fundamental motor skills. You're looking at locomotor and object control on the TGMD. That's not going to tell you anything about fitness. You need to use the Brockport fitness test or the FitnessGram. And the other thing is then you get into administrative feasibility. How much time do you have? How much time can you spend with this child unless that child is in your program? Then you can spend a lot of time with that child. And so you have all these, it's not a perfect science, and there's all this give and take. I'm sure there's other people out here that have all administered the TGMD and have other thoughts about that maybe want to share.
Lauren, do you have a question about the TGMD or another question?
Can I just say, from an administrative standpoint, whatever your most current assessment is, whatever the latest version is what you want to be using that's published or out, because attorneys will ask those questions as to, well, what version are you using? And when you are using the older one, they will say, well, why haven't you used the newer one? Was the validity and reliability on this? So you want to make sure as new assessment comes out that your school districts, departments, you, whatever professionally are buying the newer assessments and have them in your repertoire to use, because you don't want to be stuck using an older version of an assessment when there's been a newer one that's come out.
And what Kathy just said, you need to tell your administrator. What really bothers me is when teachers come out and say, could you send me the TGM? No, it's a published, it's like, that's plagiarism. So my point is that if your administrator says, well, we don't have any money, says, if I'm at an IEP meeting and I need to have the updated tests, I need assessment instruments, just like the school psych needs assessment instruments. You need to advocate for these things. You need to be able to articulate that I am a professional, I need assessment tools. That's what we do for a living. Okay? That's just that bugs me.
All right, well, this is actually embarrassing then, if this is what bugs you, Barry, because, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I was meeting with he's the director of health and physical education from the Rochester Public Schools. So the entire school district in Rochester, New York, this guy governs, so they actually hired BOCES, which is our special education bureau. They hired BOCES to develop a gross motor assessment. I don't know what their background was, and it just is like Gallup, yes or no. And it was like this very, very objective or subjective assessment. And I'm looking at this assessment that all the teachers in Rochester Public Schools, Rochester City Schools are using. And we had a meeting with this guy. And Maury Samalot, some of you know Maury, he's a colleague of mine in Adapted. We were showing him the TGMD. Okay, mind you, he's the director of health and physical education. He's like, wow, that's such a cool assessment. Wow, is that new? Yeah. 1985, right? So then I just went to another workshop or an in-service with some teachers over in Buffalo, and several school districts were also creating their own gross motor assessments that weren't valid or reliable. Just some PTs got together and put down some gross motor skills that, again, were subjective. And they don't know about the TGMD, which is, it's beyond me. How does anybody not know about a valid and reliable assessment that's been around since 1985? And so my question, I agree, I think they would buy it if they knew about it. And my issue is, the fact that the director of the Rochester City School District, and then, he's calling up some of our grads who are teaching in the school district and telling them they have to do an in-service on how to use the TGMD. And so that's an issue that I have right now is yeah, it's great that the TGMD3 is coming out. How are we going to advertise it to these administrators that really don't, I don't know what they read, I don't know what information or where they can get information, but we need to be speaking to at administrator conferences, superintendent conferences, because yeah, they can be sued if they're not using the appropriate assessments, but we need to get the word out there. I'm not sure how we can do that, but it's embarrassing to me when you have these kind of administrators that don't even know about it.
Well, let me ask a question out of the audience. How many people have used the Brunix Osgorenski? Okay. All right, how many people are familiar with the Bot 2, the Brunix 2? The case is so much different in carrying. I've had people say to me, oh, I don't want to use it, it's a long test, everything else. But if you're not familiar with the newer version or the CD for it and all the things that come with it, because you aren't familiar with these newer assessments, just like the TGMD3 that's coming or the TGMD2 from the TGMD, you have to kind of stay current on those things. You have to keep looking it up. You have to keep checking with other people, check with the universities, see what's out there, because different versions come out of these things. And we forget, we get stuck on the one assessment we have, and like you said, we have trouble getting new assessments paid for. But if psychologists are getting the new Woodcock-Johnson 3 and some of the other assessments that they use, the latest versions, we have the responsibility to get the same ones that we need for our assessment as well. And so we need to advocate for that.
So Lauren, just a few comments. It seems like since we've been in this field, we've always had this, that's why we always have assessment problems, always, it just is continuous. And there are so many adaptive physical educators across the United States that are just making up their own assessments. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. So it's back to our administrators building that bridge, and that's what Scott is really interested in his future research is building this bridge with our administrators, because they are the key to the success of us in the field. They are the key. So if you have an ear that's willing to listen, you can make major dents in the program and just keep building it, and hopefully it will, trickle and have a nice domino effect. But earlier we talked about the legislation in Adaptive P, and Scott was mentioning, do we need stronger regulations, stronger statements in Adaptive P? Yes, we do, and that could help too. But even administrators right now, we're still battling this instructional versus related, direct versus related. We're still having problems with that, and it's just going on. And now with assessment, we're still having problems. So we just have to go back to, go to the consortium, work with that team to be advocates for legislation and make the changes up there to trickle down to our administrators to hopefully
Well, I'm
solve.
also thinking, we spend money to come to these conferences, and we actually went to the state athletic director conference about something else, but I think that it would be smart of us to write articles and go to some of those national athletic director administrator conferences, because that's where the people who are going to make the difference are going to be.
Agree. You are 100% correct. Special ed directors, when they have those meetings, we need to be part of those meetings and change their minds and just get awareness. Be advocates to change them so they understand our field much better than what they think it is now.
I think sometimes those conferences, though, are pretty exclusive, and there is realistic. It's hard to get into some of those, because that is somewhere that I'm really interested in my research, is the special ed director's perspective on who we are. But with that, something that I've noticed, and something with my podcast, honestly, is my whole thing is that I want not just us to know who we are, and I think that's great, but I also want other people to be able to know who we are, and like special ed directors. And so this is something that hopefully that a few special ed directors are listening to, and something that you might be able to give to them, and it's a little bit more passive, like an article or something. Hey, check this out, there's a podcast out there for special ed directors. But I also think that APE, I talk to people, I'm younger in the field, but I talk to people that are older and then been here for a long time, and these problems of us for assessment or us not being well known, they're not new. They've been around, and they haven't changed a lot of times. Now, APA, adaptive physical activity, seems to be changing right now. There seems to be change in perception, knowledge of us, but not in APE. And I think sometimes we have a marketing issue, just not with assessment, but overall. And I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I think that we don't advertise ourselves overall very well. And I don't know how to do that, but I think it's something to look into in the future.
Well, sometimes it's a state-by-state issue, too, as well. You know what I mean? Like Lauren's point, she's talking about upstate New York, and there are a lot of administrators, and what I'm taking from all what we're talking about, I mean, I've been in this field for 40 years, and sometimes I feel like I'm in a time capsule, and what decade is it? Is it the 70s? Is it the 80s? Is it the 90s? And we're going backwards, but the reality is we just have to keep advocating and educating people and not always speaking to the choir. It's a lot more fun to speak to the choir because everybody's going to reinforce you, and it's not easy to go in to a bunch of special ed directors and saying, hey, what you're doing is incorrect and we need to do this. You can do that in a professional way. And so I think that's what's important, and that's what I would take away here. Is if everybody in this audience went back Monday and educated their special ed director, that's why we developed the guidelines for AP in California. The first thing that we did with the guidelines was give it to every special ed director. Now, did they read it? Maybe not, but it's there. And so you have an obligation, I believe, as a professional that is educated and knows better, to educate others. And you have to juggle, and there's a lot of things you have to juggle. You have to juggle life, but I believe you have an obligation to educate others that don't know our field.
Hi. Just a practical question. When I'm closing up my report and I'm giving my recommendations, and you're saying, don't use qualify, eligibility, criteria, benefit. We're told that we give the Volkswagen and not the Cadillac, and that everybody would benefit. But so what wording would you use? In conclusion, my report, Joey blank for adaptive physical education services.
In the guidelines, I believe we use the word need. And you're not just saying that they needed adapted physical education, but also that LRE, the setting in which it was going to happen. So you're making that, you've just made this whole case, and because of this whole case that you just wrote all about, this is what you're saying they need to be able to access the best of the motor skills that they possibly can and all the aspects of physical education. So, need. But that whole qualifying eligibility, that's the tricky piece.
I agree with Marcy with just saying that. And another thing that we reinforce in our state, I'm not too keen on the words directed and consult. So I just say there's a need for adaptive physical education services 2 times a week for 30 minutes in addition to their general physical education program. And that just doesn't throw any alarms up. And then the paperwork business they can take care of. So I'm not too keen on the verbiage either. I just like to say, this is what we're going to do. This is the need for your child, and that's it.
Nancy's question is an interesting one if you really look at the underlying tones to it, because I think one of the things philosophically is the point she made about we're going to give them a Volkswagen versus a Cadillac. One of the things that a lot of new teachers, when they come back to talk to me, say is that this child needs this, but my administration said that's going to cost too much money or whatever. And so you philosophically are really drawn on what am I supposed to do, and the bottom line is that you want to try to do what's best for that child, and you need to maybe beforehand talk to your administration, talk to your special ed director, talk to that lead teacher. Here are the things that I think this kid really needs, and this is what I'm going to talk about at the meeting. And because we're getting into a philosophical thing.
The uniqueness about our program, which I love, is it's different in everywhere you go. You go next door, it's different. You have a different administrator, you have to act differently. You go to this one, we have to do this new verbiage over here. So that's the beauty of we're continuously changing. But the downside of that is what Lauren was mentioning, or where all of us were mentioning, we're not consistent. Even though we have this feds up here and this is what we're supposed to be doing, each state interprets it differently. Then you have each special education, LEA is interpreting that differently. So we're not uniform at all across. But the beauty is we're advocates, so we can make the changes and hopefully trickle back up.
Do we want to be uniform?
Oh no, I don't.
Okay.
That was Marcy speaking.
Okay.
But I agree.
Sorry.
That was Lisa.
Okay. Is there any other questions? We'll take the last one, all right?
Hi, I'm Sean from the West Contra Costa Unified School District. I'm an APE specialist, and thanks for going over today. But I'd like to just pose a question kind of through a hypothetical scenario. So let's say you have a student that is receiving services, and the student has every right to have access to whether it's general ed PE or their specially designed PE. But the teacher, the placement, it's not safe and it's not successful for the student. So you have the student on consultation. The skills are there. You're not working directly with the student. You're there to support that student and to support that teacher and to modify the program and to modify the environment. The teacher is not following through. The modifications aren't happening. And the kid continues to struggle with whatever the placement might be. As an APE specialist, what do you do in that situation?
Well, hopefully you have a good rapport with your administrator. That would be my first conversation. I probably would take that back because, again, based on the data that's collecting, this is part of the data. They're not implementing the program that's been designed. And this was an IEP team decision. This is a legal document. This is something that you may need to, if you've got a good relationship with this teacher, say, hey, here's the legal document, we need to kind of do this, you know, and if you can go that route, great. If you can get them on board, fine. But if you can't, because you don't supervise them and contractually and other things, you probably want to take the next step up there and saying, this is what's going on, here's the documentation, I'd like you to come out and see what's going on, see if you can get them on board that way so that they can talk directly, their supervisor can talk directly to them and say, look, we need to implement this. And it may be a program specialist that's involved, it may be the resource specialist, whoever the case manager is, you may need to take a look at those pieces as well. But go the next step up as far as your administration, but make sure you have good documentation. Again, data is key, it's gold. And so you need to make sure that you have that, and that you've also tried to document, you know, how can I help you and what can we try? What have you tried? You know, you seem still a little nervous. What's going on here? See if you can't get that relationship piece and get that buy-in and say, look, you know, come on over here while I'm doing it, and let them try it and see if they can, you know, alleviate some fears. But you kind of have to do a little bit of more digging and investigative and some hand-holding. You don't want to ruin that relationship for future, so you kind of want to tread very carefully. But you definitely, if it's a compliance issue, you're going to have to say, hey, you know, we've got to restructure this because this is a legal document. Bottom line is parents are going to come back there and say, why wasn't this implemented and why wasn't something done?
I just want to add that to collect the data, we were able to use at school sites an RTI team, and they have somebody who goes around to do this data collection. And so I gave them the things to look for, and they watched a week of general PE so that we had that data.
The scenario you're giving us is, you know, early in my career as a teacher, this happened on a couple of different occasions. This happens a lot. And at first, you know, you struggle and you want to be a team player, and you know that you're going to be going to that school and working at that school, and so you don't want to burn all the bridges down. And some teachers get it. You know, like you say, hey, come, let's work together. Let me show you how I would do it, or let's do stations, or let me give you some strategies. But there sometimes they get it. Like if you have to get to the next step where you say, you know, if this doesn't happen, I'm obligated to do this, and most teachers will get that. But if they don't, that's a hard thing. Then you got to go to your administration, your special ed director.
I have a question for you, Sean.
Yeah.
Do you have an administrator that will listen to you, that will support you?
Yes, we do.
That's who I would go to immediately, and
Okay.
just start the discussion and have solutions,
Right.
and have them help you decide which avenue to choose for the solution.
Right, because that was my greatest fear, was just because we are, I mean, with paraprofessionals, teachers, I mean, we have to keep that relationship, and so that was my, you know, just questions. How do we balance that? But I like that. First, trying to work with the teacher,
Yeah,
figuring
you
it
want to
out,
try to do something,
and
maybe
then going to admin.
maybe trying something where you're doing some training for them, because
Right.
maybe it's a real fear factor kind of thing. You know, they don't want to throw a ball and be liable because the ball hits the kid in the
Right.
head.
Yeah.
So it may be a lot of hand-holding and training, and the willingness for you to take some of the gen ed students with you when you're out there in a station or an activity, and have him take some of the kids, and you guys kind of breaking that up. You're going to have to develop that relationship piece, and so you're going to have to get creative as you are with the kids with this particular individual. But then, yes, absolutely, you need to let the administrator know.
Okay.
I was just trying to make sure that you communicate, if you had administrator, that they know what you're doing. Of course, speaking with the teachers is very important, but just having that support behind you, knowing that you're making those right decisions. Because safety, that is a major red flag. That's the key to, that's always first and foremost is safety. And if it's not safe, now we have to sort that out.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to finish up. I really love this discussion. It seemed like we had a bunch of people trickling in and out. I don't even know how many people we had, but it was exciting. And I want to say thank you to the panel. Thank you to the audience. Before we go, I want to see, can each one of you just say like one sentence on what you want them to take away on assessment?
The one thing I want to remind everybody and for everybody to think about is assessment is more than the tests and it's more than the scores.
One quick thing to say is think of the child, think of the student, and where you're taking them for their next couple of years. And make sure that you use appropriate assessments.
Multifaceted. Don't forget low incident kids, severely disabled, that you can informally assess as well as standardized assessment. Those are some things I'd share. I don't know if we have time to do this, but I just want to make a real quick plug for Scott's podcast and how much I've enjoyed the podcast and how much I've used it with my university students, and just taking little pieces of it and say, if I'm lecturing on a certain aspect, and I said, let's listen to this one piece. And I would really support what Scott's doing, because I think it really has a real impact. There's a lot of people that would rather listen to a podcast than read a chapter in a textbook. And it's interesting that I would say this, because I just think everybody should just be consuming all kinds of literature and everything. But I realize that a lot of people are just auditory learners, and they would just rather listen to a podcast while they're on the 405 trying to get to their next school. So that's a wonderful medium to use, and I support Scott, and I hope he continues to do it.
Thank
I have to follow that. Wow. The one thing I think that I always think of is the whole child. That this is about a whole child, that we are looking at the motor functioning of the child, but how it fits in all aspects functionally in the classroom, on the playground, in the field, at home. You're looking at it in so many different levels that really and truly you're the kind of bind and connection for all the other pieces and that the child is assessed for because of that. And so just remembering that we are looking at the whole child. And I agree with Barry.
All right, well, thank you so much, and thanks for those that stayed, and let's give everyone a round of applause. And